Hi, I'm Jodi Carlton, Neurodiverse Relationship Expert, and welcome to Season 4 of my podcast, Your Neurodiverse Relationship. This season, I've asked Mona Kay of the Neurodiverse Love podcast to join me as co-host to talk about some pretty personal stuff. Mona and I both help partners and couples understand how neurodiversity is impacting their relationship, and also how to navigate difficult decisions and choices. We've identified 5 key steps for assessing your relationship challenges and determining a path forward for yourself and your relationship. For some of you, this means working with your partner to gain insight and tools for communication and connection, and also figuring out strategies that work for you as a couple, even though they may be pretty non-traditional. But hey, if it works, it works. For others, it will mean recognizing if and when it's time to end your relationship. Mona and I have both been in marriages with neurodiverse partners that lasted over 2 decades. And in this podcast series, we're going to share with you how we navigated our own relationships along the way. And let's just say we didn't know what we were doing. Mona and I are going to go deep into the good, the bad, and the ugly. In order to share these deep and vulnerable memories, we both chose to record this season without video to prevent the distraction of talking to our screens. We know you will recognize yourselves and so much of what we have to share, and our hope is that you will feel less alone and that our journeys will help you in your own neurodiverse relationship. Welcome. What will we talk about today? Hi, Mona. Thank you again, and as always, for being here for this last episode in our 5-part series of navigating your neurodiverse relationship. To those of you listening, if you missed the first 4 episodes, I really encourage you to go back and listen to those. We've just been getting so much feedback and so many comments from the listeners who are resonating with our experiences, and it really doesn't matter where you are in your relationship, whether it's early in a dating relationship or if you've been married for 35 years. What we're sharing and what we've experienced is relatable to pretty much every stage of the relationship. So be sure and go back and listen to those. Today is about step 5, which is figuring out a path forward once you have assessed the risk in step 1. Stopped the bleed in step 2, which is the things that are really causing major destruction to you and your partner and maybe your family as well. And then step 3 is identifying the actual root of the problems. Oftentimes when we're in that fight or flight, bleeding out mode, the problems that we think are the problems are actually surface level symptoms of the true problems. And so once you're able to get out of that boxing ring, stop the bleed, I use those expressions interchangeably, then you're able to actually look under the surface, usually with a therapist who's trained in neurodiversity. That's very helpful, and get to the actual root of the issues, which again, we've said before, is never just neurodiversity. There's always layers. And then in step 4, you start to look at figuring out what your options are, what you have to think out of the box, meaning, not go with just traditional mindsets of what relationships and marriages look like and how the relationship is set up, the household is set up, but look at what the options actually are. And then today, in step 5, it's about figuring out a path forward. So once you've gathered all that information, then you have to start making decisions for yourself and for your relationship. And Mona and I are about to talk about what that process was like for us without this model. So it was definitely not the way we did it was not the way to do it. And so that's why we're sharing with you all the things that didn't work well for us, and in the hopes that we can help some of you make your own choices and decisions, and whether that be that you do need to end the relationship or that you're going to be able to stay in the relationship and work with your partner. We love it. We love seeing that. So let's talk about inappropriate hope.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. When I heard that term, I'm like, I'm taking it and I'm using it as often as I can. And I did an episode on it. I think for me, I had inappropriate hope throughout my marriage, but most of the inappropriate hope was during the 2+ years of our separation. And I'll explain briefly how it was inappropriate hope. So when we first separated, my ex wanted a divorce, and I asked him, please, can we just do a 6-month separation? And he agreed to it after a lot of talking. And then when we were close to the 6 months, he agreed to move back into our house and to give up his apartment. He agreed to that face to face. So I had hope. I didn't think it was inappropriate. Next thing I knew, he told me he had signed a new 6-month lease. That should have been, for me, not a single red flag. That should have been a dozen red flags. And I said, okay, you're showing me what you want. I'm going to file for divorce. But I didn't, because I had inappropriate hope. And I kept hoping that we would continue to date. And then after that 6-month lease ended, he would come back into our marriage. He would come back into our house. And he kept making promises. He literally promised, and I believed him. And we continued to date. And he would say he wanted to do this or that. And I'd say, great. And then he would not follow through. He wanted to go away for weekends. He wanted to travel with me. He wanted me to move into his apartment for a while. And then he went back on it. He went back on his word. He would ask me out on dates, and then we would get together and he would be nasty or rude to me or cold as ice. And then we'd be intimate and he'd be kind. And it was a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde constantly. So I literally, Jodi, was destroying my emotional health because I had so much inappropriate hope for over 2 years. But the first sign was him signing another 6-month lease. So what I want to share about inappropriate hope with the listeners is that you can love your partner. You can love them till, the cows come home. But that is, in my opinion, never enough. Actions, to me, speak very, very loud, and oftentimes they speak louder than words. And it's a Maya Angelou quote that I go by now and have with every man that I've dated since my separation. When somebody shows you who they are, believe them. Mm-hmm. And maybe in neurodiverse relationships, you may have to give a little bit more space and time. But chances are, if somebody says to you, what my ex said to me, he said several things. He said, I do not want to talk to anybody who isn't interested in the things I'm interested in. That was a big one. And then there were others, but the last straw that broke the camel's back was when I was in the hospital. I thought I was having a heart attack. And he walked in. It was like 2:30 in the morning. We were separated. I called him, let him know the ambulance was taking me to the emergency room. And in the emergency room, he didn't ask how I was. He didn't say hello. He didn't hold my hand. Nothing, no communication whatsoever. And I said to him, if you're going to be like that, just go home. He screamed at me, I'm not going home, I'm staying. And then a few minutes later, he said, I'm divorcing you next week. Screamed at me in the emergency room. That was in 2018, April of 2018. And 6 months later, we were divorced. I share this. I've shared it on my podcast. I share this because inappropriate hope can be so dangerous to your mental health. And then that affects your physical health, right?
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that story, because I know so many people will relate to the emergency room, not necessarily him choosing that moment to tell you he's getting a divorce, but the lack of empathy and concern. And I want to just emphasize that it's not about right now villainizing anyone who's autistic or neurodivergent, but like Mona's saying, when someone shows you who they are, believe them. And that's not a negative thing. That's not, that's not villainizing people. It's what it means is if we're a duck, we can't be, a rabbit. And we're going to be who we are, no matter how much you want us to be differently or how much, anybody wants to be different. And so behavior is a language, and it's a language we really need to listen to. And I think the inappropriate hope goes both ways. It's something else to remember is that you talked about all the promises, Mona, and I don't know your ex-husband, but I know that my ex promised a lot. And I know that in those moments, he really wanted to keep those promises, and he wanted to be what I was asking him to be. I hear this a lot from the people I'm working with, couples who come to me and they're so upset and feel so betrayed and so lied to. And it feels, they're wondering, is, my partner a narcissist? And that's a whole other conversation. If sometimes narcissism is a possibility, it's a totally different thing though. It's not autism. It's totally different, but they're wondering because they feel duped. They feel like, well, he's lying to me or she's lying to me and making promises and not keeping them. And when it's a neurodiverse relationship where there's not some kind of toxic personality, oftentimes those lies are rooted in inappropriate hope, because if either partner is desperately needing something different from the other partner, but you still love each other, and so many times that one partner will make promises because they want so badly to believe that they can actually follow through, because they do love you and they do want you to have your needs met. And so they promise, but then can't follow through because it's not who they are. I always tell people behavior is a language, but it's also, there's always a reason for it. There's a reason why we do what we do, and there's a reason why we don't do what we don't do. And it can feel so, sometimes we get real blaming and finger pointy. But in reality, if one or both of you, and usually I think in neurodiverse relationships, it's both of you. I know for us, my ex and I, there was inappropriate hope for both. Both of us experienced it. We both kept believing that's in something. We kept believing in our love for each other, because we did love each other a lot. And we kept believing that we would somehow make it work. And we kept making promises to each other about how we would change our interactions and change our behaviors and change what we do. But what it came down to was we were two human beings that couldn't be what the other one needed us to be. And it was disastrous.
And I think that's really important for the neurodiverse couples to hear. As much as we want our partner to be the person they were maybe at the beginning of the relationship when they were courting us, or we were, on our best behavior, when our partner's change occurs, they may be becoming truer to who they are, whether, it's unmasking or just being more comfortable, whatever term you want to use, however you want to identify it. When, you're on your best behavior at the beginning of a relationship, whether it's a year, 2 years, 3 years, they call it the honeymoon period. The honeymoon period can last, I've heard some researchers say, 3 to 4 years. But when your partner and you are becoming really your authentic selves, and you find that you're just not connecting anymore, and one of you wants to go for therapy or coaching and the other doesn't, having that inappropriate hope can really create an unhealthy relationship and create unhealthy individuals. So for me, figuring out the path forward was, Jodi, the most difficult decision I ever made in my entire life. There is no decision that was more difficult, because I couldn't imagine that we had committed 30 years plus to each other, that we still loved each other, and that we couldn't figure this out. But I know that I finally had to hear some of the things my ex said. And another thing he said is, I don't want to do any more work. I don't want to. I'm done. And I had to believe that. So for me, the path forward was divorce and then taking time to heal. And I will tell you, I think I've shared this with you before, Jodi, we divorced in May of 2018. I started the Neurodiverse Love podcast in September of 2020. So it took me over 2 years to go for therapy, to hang out with my friends, to go for trips, to spend time alone, to date other men. I fell in love again. And to find the essence of Mona, because I had lost her. For sure, I had lost her. And to take all the time and space I needed to heal before I even thought about sharing what I had gone through. And I want folks to hear this, because I say it on the podcast, on the Neurodiverse Love podcast, and I want to say it here. I think my ex-husband is a wonderful human being. I also think he got a lot of challenges. I think I am a wonderful human being. And I also think I have a lot of challenges. Neither one of us is perfect. We did the best we could in the moments that we were challenged, and the best we could as co-parents. And we probably, as long as we're on this earth, will both have room to grow and learn. I know that that is my goal, to continue growing and learning and healing when things pop up in new relationships, which they do. I don't know what his journey and path is. That's his, not my responsibility, not my path. But I want people to hear that, because just because a relationship ends, whether it's a marriage or a long-term relationship, and you understand the pain you may have caused each other, unintentional, in my case and in his case, but you can still be kind to each other.
Yeah, I want to second everything you said 100%. And the healing part, let's talk a little bit about, you and I don't have an experience of staying and making it work, but because of what we do and the people that we work with, your support groups, people reach out to you from your podcast. I work with people through coaching and social media channels where people interact with me through comments in the Facebook group. And so we've met a lot of people who are staying together and are trying to figure out how to make it work. And I know I've definitely met people who are making it work. That people like Michelle and Andrew who are have their little daughter Faith, and they're on YouTube and TikTok. I think they've been on your podcast. We've done a video cast as well. And I have another couple, Matthew and Jen, that there's a video of me talking with them, that their marriage really came close to divorce. And then they worked with me, and I'm not some miracle worker by any stretch, don't ever claim to be and won't ever claim to be. But through working with me, they were able to figure out their path forward together. And they were earlier in their marriage. I will say that it's definitely helpful if you can identify these things early on. But there are those of you out there who are in marriages at different stages that aren't at that point of antagonism and contempt and pain and just being exhausted. Like Mona's husband said, he's just done. He was done putting the work in. And I know we got to that point. Those of you who aren't at that point, and I want to just encourage you that it's still important to go through all of these steps to stop, assess the risk, stop the bleed, figure out the options, and get tapped into resources that with people, whether it's support groups like the group that we have, or other neurodiversity aware therapists or coaches who can help you figure out those options forward, because some of you will be able to make this work. I don't know. People have asked me if my ex-husband and I had known about neurodiversity, if we'd been able to make it work. And my answer to that is always, I don't know. And the reason is we also had a whole lot of other stuff that we brought into the marriage that was not about neurodiversity. And it was about some other dysfunctional stuff that I talk about previously on this series, that we just brought a whole heap of dysfunction into our relationship. So I don't know if we would have made it or not. But those of, and for all of you who are listening, neurodiversity is not the only issue in your marriage. It never will be the only issue in any relationship. But it is a framework that without it, it makes the other stuff even harder to figure out and deal with.
Yeah. And I have people asking me that question too, Jodi. If you had known you were a neurodiverse couple earlier, do you think you would have stayed together? And I don't know. There's no way to know, but I do know for sure that we would have caused each other so much less unintentional hurt and pain. Mm-hmm. And I think that the toxicity wouldn't have reached the point that it reached. And I think I said in another episode, my ex said something like, I feel like our relationship is a cancer. And as much as that hurt me, I totally agree. Our relationship had become a cancer, but I didn't think that it was a cancer that would kill us. But if you don't have the right treatment per se, I'm putting that in air quotes, you don't have the right therapist who understands neurodiverse relationships, or one or both of you doesn't want to go for treatment, then I think the cancer will kill your relationship.
Yeah. And possibly you, because you and I both, I had significant health issues. I see it every day in the clients I work with, where people's bodies are starting to fall apart because of the stress from the relationship. And it is a very, very significant problem.
I agree. There was a reason I went to the emergency room.
Right.
I thought I was having a heart attack. And that wasn't the first time that had happened in my marriage. It was for a lot of reasons. I didn't know how to regulate my nervous system. I was probably having panic attacks. There was a lot of overwhelm emotionally. And in our relationship, my ex didn't work for almost 8 years, and it wasn't because he was disabled. So I had a lot on my shoulders, and he had a lot on his shoulders in different ways that he didn't communicate with me. And so as we've said throughout this series, Jodi and I may have not continued in our relationships and our marriages, and they may have ended for me after 30 years of marriage, and for you after 19 years of marriage. But we've learned so much. And again, just like Jodi said, neither one of us have all the answers. No one ever has all the answers. But as we learn from our own relationships with family and, romantic relationships that we've had, and even with coworkers, as we learn also from the people we work with, we are able to share that information with all of you because there's so little out there that helps neurodiverse couples understand that they're not alone. There's more than when we divorced, so much more, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there was practically nothing out there. Maxine Aston was like, I always call her the mother of neurodiverse relationships because her stuff was out there and maybe a few other folks, but there wasn't a lot. And there's so much more now. And I'm just happy that we're doing this series so that folks can understand that the craziness they might be experiencing, they're not the only ones experiencing.
Yes. So we've walked them through assessing the risk. We've walked through stopping the bleed, identifying what the root problems are, the non-negotiables, identifying options. And is there anything more, Mona, that you want to say about figuring out a path forward? I mean, I think you just summarized it very well just then, but is there anything you feel like we've left out?
The only other thing I would say, Jodi, is all of us at some point in our lives were happy and we were at peace, even if it was for a very short time. It might have been when you were 6 years old. It might have been when you were 12, whenever. I found it really helpful to think back to the Mona who was happy and peaceful. And I remembered the things I enjoyed doing with others and by myself. And I've mentioned before, I just turned 60 this year. And I have brought those things back into my life. And I am the happiest and most at peace that I have ever been, and the healthiest I have ever been in my entire life. Knock on wood.
I would say that I can second that about myself as well. And I think that's another thing that I know you've mentioned codependency in your relationship. And I know I had it in mind that there was a mindset that I had that being in a marriage was part of what completed me as a whole, and that I couldn't be happy. I couldn't be fulfilled without a spouse to fulfill me and to meet my needs. And that expression comes up a lot, meeting needs. And I think a lot of times we're referring to emotional needs. And I guess the last thing I would say is when you're figuring out your path forward and you're identifying your problems, is one of the things to really get in touch with about yourself is what do you actually need to be fulfilled and happy? And if you are looking to your spouse to somehow meet your need of self-worth, of value, and you're looking for them to be the puzzle piece that's missing for you to feel good about yourself, to feel like you're worthy of love, then that in and of itself is problematic. And that's very much at the root of a codependent relationship. And I think that's something, if you decide to leave this marriage, but you still think that being in a relationship is what's going to complete you, then you're very likely to go into another relationship and repeat the cycle.
Yes.
So get help for yourself, whether it's before you leave or after you leave, because another human being is never going to fulfill you in terms of becoming someone who has self-worth and value. And I agree with Mona. I'm so happy and content and healthy, and I'm single, and I'm personally not interested. I dated for a while. I had another relationship after my divorce, just decided it wasn't for me. And I'm not ruling it out for the future. Not at all. But right now, my life is very good, and it's been so important for me to learn how to be completely whole and happy and healthy without expecting someone else to meet that need for me. And that, I think that's just such an important thing for people to know that is attainable.
Yes, absolutely. And Jodi and I have talked about this, and I am dating and I'm enjoying it, and I understand myself. So I know what I do need. I know what my non-negotiables are, and I don't have a problem communicating that with kindness and respect. Mm-hmm. There will be some men that don't want to hear it and we don't move on. And then there'll be other men that absolutely embrace that. So I think it's important for all of us to know that, we have choices as we move forward, whether we stay in the relationship we're in now or we don't.
Yeah. And the one last thing I'll say, I'll piggyback on something you said earlier on this call, is moving forward. If you're moving forward in a way that is accommodating what your partner won't do, so if your partner just won't participate, is not willing or motivated, or even has the capacity to make an effort to understand his or her contribution to the dynamics or the problems, or if they're just done, like Mona's husband was, if you are then choosing to change you and just tolerate, put up with, accommodate in order to preserve what's there, which is already obviously very problematic, that's ultimately still not going to work long term. I've told so many people that it's not a matter of when, it's a matter of if, and how much damage and destruction to you and even to your partner, to your children will eventually happen. It really does take both partners being willing and motivated to make it work. And I honestly think that that's one of the biggest things that people see in the support group that we do, because especially a lot of holistic or neurotypical partners will come thinking that the autism is the limiting factor, and that when someone is autistic, they're not capable. And how can I accommodate, change myself to be able to stand this marriage because my partner can't do it? And then they get on the support group and they see these autistic men and women who are introspecting and learning about themselves and applying themselves and making effort. And it's very eye-opening to see that it's not the autism. The autism does bring with it challenges for sure. Autism is not a rule out for partners to be willing and motivated and able to participate in making the relationship better.
I agree.
All right. Well, I think that's a wrap. Thank you again, Mona, so much for getting really personal. I know a lot of this was tough to talk about, and I haven't talked about it in depth like this in a while myself. That is the reason why we decided not to do video, just so that we could really not have to worry about looking at each other while we talk about this really difficult stuff. But thank you so much for being willing to open up your world and your life and your heart, and with me and with everybody who's listening. And hopefully we've been able to help some people in their own decision-making process. And again, we really would love to have you in the support group, or if you have any questions about anything, or just, want to reach out to Mona. You have other support groups as well. And I have coaching available and a Facebook group. So anyway, thank you so much for doing this series with me.
It's a pleasure. I always enjoy talking to you. And for those couples that are interested, I will put a plug in that I do have the Neurodiverse Love Conversation cards and the Neurodiverse Love Conversation card workbook. They're available on my website, which is neurodiverselove.com. They're both digital, and the cards are $11 and the workbook is $12.97. And they're just things that I wish my ex and I had asked each other during our marriage. And I have asked many of the questions to the men that I have been with since.
Yes, absolutely. Mona has resources on her website. I have resources. I have courses there that are helpful for those of you who are trying to figure out how to improve your communication, or even figure out if you are actually in a toxic relationship with someone who's more of a toxic personality. I'm not sure when season 5 is going to be, but I'll have lots of bonus episodes for you between now and then too. So thanks for listening, and we certainly hope that this has been helpful. Thanks, Mona.
Thank you, Jodi.
Thank you again to Mona K for co-hosting this very important podcast series about navigating the choices and decisions that are difficult to make in our neurodiverse relationships. For more information about the courses, programs, coaching, and groups that Mona and I both offer, you can visit my website at jodicarlton.com and Mona's website at neurodiverselove.com. Be sure to subscribe or follow to get updates about new episodes.